Welcome to On the Way, a podcast about life. But not just any life, it's about life with Jesus. Why do people follow Jesus, and how do they get started? And what difference does following Jesus make in their lives? Before Christians had a name, they were known as people of the way, people who followed Jesus' teachings. People have been on the way for nearly 2,000 years now. During the podcast, we explore the ways that people become followers of Jesus and why, and what difference following Jesus makes in their lives. On the Way is produced by the Baptist Standard, a donor-supported provider of news, opinion, and resources for living like Jesus. I'm Eric Black, editor of the Baptist Standard. I'm glad you're with us today. We have with us this morning Kathryn Freeman, and Kathryn, I am so glad that you're with us. Kathryn was the Public Policy Director at Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, and she is now a student at Baylor University's Truett Theological Seminary. She also is one half of Melanated Faith, the podcast. And so, Kathryn, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
As you know, we focus on two questions. One is, how did you become a follower of Jesus? And the second is, what difference does following Jesus make in your life? And Kathryn, you've shared about your faith experience in various places, but I'd like to hear how you became a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a Christian home. I'm from the Dallas area. My parents were married. We're the first married couple at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, which is pastored by Dr. Tony Evans. And so grew up in a Christian home, and my parents were very involved in the church, and so we were like always there. And I accepted Jesus Christ when I was maybe like 6 or 7 at Vacation Bible School, and like went down the aisle and was baptized. And but I think in terms of like when I actually decided to follow Jesus, I think I would say it was the summer between my senior and junior year of high school. I went to like a Christian camp with our church youth group. And I think it's like, there's like this thing, I think when you grow up in the church, like you feel like, or sometimes I think especially when you're young and you accept Jesus Christ, you're like, oh, am I really doing this right? I don't know.
Right.
You kind of like, anytime there's an altar call, you're like, oh, I lied to my mom today, so maybe I'm not that good of a Christian, so maybe I need to go down again. But I say that to say when I was, I think 17, I went to this Christian camp and I think rededicated my life to Christ. And I think from that point on, like, I feel like I made a conscious decision to just like live differently, and to follow Jesus for my own personal thing, which I think is like so important for kids that have grown up in the church. Cause it's kind of like, I do think there gets to be a point where it's like, oh, am I doing this because this is the thing my family does? Or like, this is how I was raised? Or is this like, I'm personally choosing that? And I feel like at 17, I personally chose like, I am following Jesus Christ. Like, I am a Christian. I'm going to live my life according to this book. I'm, committed to the local church. I think that was the point where I like made that decision.
So what was it at 17 that was different for you in terms of how you received the message about Jesus, or how you were thinking about Jesus?
I think it was just, I think it was that one, I feel like I was like making, like I fully understood the weight of what I was saying. I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with, walking down the aisle and being baptized at like, as young children. Like, I don't want people to say that like my first conversion experience wasn't real, because in my mind that is real. Like, that is a part of my story and my journey. But I also think like, as a church kid, it just becomes like, this is the thing. And like, we go on Sundays, we go on Wednesdays, we go to Vacation Bible School, I lead youth group, we were, and it at some ways it becomes a part of I think when you're raised in a Christian home, a part of the thing that you're, and my parents were, this is not a knock on them. Like, I was raised very well, and I think I'm so grateful for my family, but it's like the thing. I mean, I didn't know anyone who lived any other way, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, this is how this is how things are. Like, in the same way you don't like lie to your parents, or like you do your homework, like you go to church. And I thought that that's what it was. And I think, I think one, a greater exposure, like by the time I got to high school, like I had friends that weren't Christians, and I saw people, like people sleep in on Sundays. And so I think that was a thing. And I also think the closer I got to like leaving my parents' home, and thinking about like
what was going to come next.
What was going to come next? Because
Yeah.
like this, it's like a common trope, right? Like the kids go to college, Christian kids go to college, and they, atheist professor or whatever, and they sort of fall away from the faith. And I think, that just that at that age you start thinking about that more. And I think I was just exposed to different ways of living and thinking about things, and it's like, oh no, this isn't what everybody does. And so for me it was like, no, I believe Jesus is real. I believe he has a plan for my life, and I want to do what he like I want to follow him. And so I think that's just what was different. I think I fully understood more like this is a way of life. Like you are choosing to live differently than any like other people in the world. And so I think I just, when you're 6 or 7, you're just like, this is the thing, and everyone does it. And I think when I was like 17, I was like, oh no, not everyone does.
A lot of people at school were not doing it.
Yeah, no, a lot of people at school were not doing it. I mean, I had like a very sheltered childhood. I like went to Christian schools. Like we were not allowed to watch secular shows. I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music. So, like all of my friends were my church friends. And it wasn't really until like I switched to like a public school, and I went to like a high school, and was just friends with a lot more different types of people. And I'm grateful. Like those girls were wonderful, and I had a great experience in high school. But I think I just was exposed to more and realized, oh no, okay, not everyone lives this way.
Yeah. We're going to take a sponsor break, and we'll be right back.
Since 1952, South Texas Children's Home Ministries has focused on healing hearts and sharing hope. Their 9 ministries focus on helping hurting children and families, all regardless of an individual's ability to pay. To find out more, visit www.stchm.org.
How did that work out? When I say work out, I don't mean did it work out well for you? Did it work out poorly for you? What I mean is, so from the point where you made this decision that you're going to follow Christ, you know what this means. How did that work itself out in your life?
Yeah, so it is hard to be a teenager. I think I really was like, okay, so just like a type A perfectionist, and I like always want my parents to be proud of me. And I remember in like youth group hearing stories from like youth group leaders who are probably about the age I am now. And it's like so funny because I thought, oh my God, they're so old, which is not the case. But when you're a teenager, it's just, you're off.
Yeah.
About like just the danger of college and how you like go in, you get caught up in all these things. And so part, I think also too, is just like, I didn't want that to be my story. Like I wanted to have a testimony of like faithfulness at 18 and 19. And like, not at all was I like perfect. And I, God redeems all things. But I feel like I really wanted to like have the kind of relationship with him that I could say, no, it is possible to like have friends that are not Christians, feel peer pressure, feel the like weight of like making different choices, and it is possible to do that. And it's okay to do that. Like, and I think you want to seek out relationships with people, even people who, like, I'm grateful that I have had friends that were not Christians, because I always felt like they respected, like I never felt like it kind of was like a joke. Oh, Kathy can't do that, but it was like, they were respectful of those boundaries. And I think the biggest way it worked out for me is I, in college, was very involved in my local church. And our church had a ministry where we went to kind of like, I hate this term, but like a more economically disadvantaged part of town. And we ran like a youth group for the kids in the community where we partnered with a church, that was actually in that neighborhood, and we ran sort of like a youth group for their kids. The church itself didn't have paid staff, so like this was like a way of like to engage the community, to bring them into that church, to expose them or whatever. And so we did like after school programs, we did tutoring, we like played with them, you know, it was whatever.
And where was that?
I went to Texas A&M, so this Bryan College Station.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just like transformed my life. Like, I don't know where I was headed before that experience, but I felt like, you know, in wanting to be faithful and like God hadn't called me. Like, I loved youth group growing up, and so like the idea of like being a youth group leader, and I think particularly the fact that, so in high school, in college, I went to predominantly white church, and you know, the kids in our youth group were predominantly African American and Latino. And so I think just the opportunity to like be a youth group leader to girls that like looked like me and had yeah, and just wouldn't have had that otherwise, because you know, it just, my youth group and the women that led our group and made just such a huge impact in our life. And I like felt like, okay, God, like this is something I can do, like, because so much of it is like discipleship is just like relational. So I did that ministry. I mentored or discipled one girl specifically for almost 4 years, and you know, my relationship with her was like, yeah, like I said, it transformed my life. I so in tutoring and mentoring her, her senior year, my senior year of college, she decided she wanted to be the first person in her family to go to college.
Oh wow. Okay.
She had 8 siblings, but her parents were like married, loved each other, loved the Lord. She, you know, was a good student. She made good grades in high school. And so, I mean, this is like, should be, you know, she should be able to do this. So my roommate and I were like, okay, we'll do SAT tutoring. We'll like run our own like SAT tutoring camp. And
going up against Kaplan, huh?
Yeah, and it was, and well, you know, and the thing was like, my parents were able to pay for a course, and so I had all the Kaplan books, and like, and it's so cost prohibitive, and so so we used those materials, and so we were doing the flashcards, because the SAT was different then. I don't know what it's like now, but you had to know all these words to do these like analogies.
Right.
A part of the SAT. Anyways, we're doing the flashcards. I wanted to pick an easy word because it's like, you know, built her confidence, like, you can do this. So the first card I show her, she's like looking, she is like, I don't know. I use it in a sentence, you know, try to give her some context, and she just isn't getting it. She's getting frustrated. And the word was denial. And I'll never forget that, because it's like, I feel like I knew that, and it dawned on me that because this African-American child in a predominantly African-American school, like under-resourced Title I school, that there was like an acceptance of, well, she shouldn't have the same expectations or dreams as kids that go to like suburban schools or middle. So it's fine that, you know, she's got subpar books and that, you know, subpar education. And it just like awoke something in me where it was just like, you know, like in my understanding of scripture, like God cares about this, and God cared about her. Like, God loved her and had a plan for her life. And it just felt like all the things like people like to say about like why children from impoverished backgrounds can't succeed. It's like, oh, there's no father in the home, we got to talk about fatherlessness, or they don't value education, or just all the things that people say was not true. Like her family deeply cared about education. They deeply saw that this was a route out of poverty. Like, her parents were involved and engaged in her life. And so it's just like, no, we've just as a society or a culture have made the decision that like this is okay. And like, I personally am like, this is not okay. And I don't think God thinks it's okay. And so that kind of was like, I wanted to like work on education policy and, you know, help more kids, like the kids that I worked with, have better access to education. So like, that's part. So I think to me, the biggest difference that like, you know, choosing to follow Jesus made in my life is that I feel like in some ways I'm very attuned to injustice. I do think it's part of it as a personality bent. You know, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, like I'm an
Yes.
8.
Okay.
But beyond that, I just think I think that I read over and over again in scripture that like God has a special eye on the poor, on the marginalized. He cares deeply about injustice. And I just feel like if this is the thing the church exists for, I mean, obviously to make disciples, but being a disciple means we see what God sees. And we do something about the things that God would want to do something about. And obviously we can't solve the problems because we're not God, but to say, oh, I'm a disciple and it has no meaning outside the four walls of the church. And that, you know, like, I think I heard someone say once, like, if your church picked up and like left the community, would anybody notice other than the Christians? And I think about that in my life. Like, if I left this place, would people feel like, oh, there's something missing? Like, and I just feel like that has been the biggest difference is like, I want to know Jesus and I want to make him known. And I think one of the ways in which you do that is not by what you say, but what you do. And so, you know, I just want to always demonstrate that like God cares deeply about injustice and people that are being taken advantage of.
The Bible's pretty explicit about that, in fact, in more than one place too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just all over scripture, and it's, I think it's not a coincidence. I mean, it's not a coincidence that when Jesus is like walking fully into his ministry, that he chooses that passage in Isaiah that I've come, you know, for the poor. And like, I mean, there's a reason that of all the Old Testament that he had access to, that was what he spoke about his ministry. And
it said that he went looking for that passage.
Yeah. So that he intentionally chose to read, you know,
and it's not like the Isaiah scroll is a small thing.
I know. and it's not,
and it didn't have numbers, so he had to go hunting for it. Yeah.
And it's not like it's in the front. It's not the first verse.
Right.
So I think if that is the tone that he set for his ministry, I think people oftentimes like, and it is in the Old Testament, and like obviously that's part of the Bible too. But I think sometimes people like dismiss it because they're like, oh, that's not what Jesus did, or that's not what Paul did, or that's not what Peter did. But you know, I think it's significant that he read that as part of his opening, you know, his this is what my ministry is about. And then I think even in his ministry, like the people that he saw and healed, right, like were people, the woman at the well, the single Phoenician woman, like, you know, even like Peter and John, like I think it's in the beginning of Acts where the man is like outside the gate and like they see him, and you know that man had been there his whole life, and people just maybe gave him some money and walked by. But that Peter, like they stopped and saw him and saw his need and like met, like we're like, no, you can be healed, like get up your mat and walk. And so I just think that over and over again you see scripture giving like us, you know, God has a special eye for the oppressed and the brokenhearted and the marginalized. And I just, as you know, someone who follows him, like what kind of disciple lives totally different than the person that is like discipling them? You know, like you don't get to decide. Like we all look like what we're discipled by. And so I think you can't call yourself a follower of Jesus and not give attention to the things that God gives attention to.
So this experience mentoring this young woman sort of changed your trajectory, it sounds like. Yeah.
No, because
was that a solidifying moment for you?
Well, okay, so a couple things. So, and like, again, how God can use all things. It was solidifying. Like I wanted to do educational policy. So I was an English major at A&M. I thought before that I wanted to go into like book editing. I thought like, oh, I want to, or work in a magazine. Like, you know, I like have always really been into like, like I've always loved to read and like magazines and things like that. So I thought, oh, it would be cool to be some sort of editor or like, you know, magazine writer, whatever. And then the experience like mentoring my friend, because about the time that I'm doing this tutoring with her, college is ending, and it's like, okay, what's your next thing? So I'm like starting to have to like look for jobs, and I hated it. I hated going to job fairs. Like I hated sending resumes. Like because it just was like, I think I want to do this thing, but I have no idea how to do it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go to graduate school. Like I'm gonna get a master's degree. And like before this experience, like this moment, I thought, okay, I'm gonna get a master's degree. I want to get a master's degree in English. So I'm talking to my parents about it. And my dad is like, I'm not paying for that. Like, what are you going to do with a master's degree in English? He's like, do you want to be a professor? Like, what is your end goal? And I was like, well, I don't know, Dad. I don't know what I want to do. I'm not ready, I don't think, to like get a job. And I love English and I love reading and writing. So like, this makes sense. And he was like, yeah, no, we're not. He was like, he was like, you can go to law school or you can go to business school. And so all of these things are like happening simultaneously, where this experience with my friend, and then I was like, okay, so my dad's like, I don't want to work. My dad said I can go to law school or go to business school. I really want to work on education policy. I thought about doing going to like a master's of public policy program, but like around the same time, and one of my I minored in political science. One of my poli-sci professors had like career day in class and invited a friend of hers who had worked in I think in both the Bush and Clinton administrations on education policy to speak to our class. And I asked him, I was like, I'm really interested in education policy now. Like, what programs would you recommend? I really want to go to graduate school. And he was like, go to law school. Don't go to public policy school, because he's like, law school is one more year and people know what a lawyer is. They don't know what it's like hard to like understand what did you get out of a master's in public policy, but people instantly are like, oh, you went to law school, and so I think it was the combination of those three things. I think it was, wanting to work on education policy, not really wanting to work just yet, and then also to like him being like, no, you should do this. And I think that's how I ended up in law school, because it wasn't, and it's crazy, like this is my favorite thing about like God and how he works, and it's hard when you're in it because it just feels like there's so much uncertainty, but I love looking back and seeing how he was like weaving all these things together, and how like nothing is ever wasted in God's economy. And like, so I obviously did public policy for 10 years before coming to seminary, but I also like write for magazines, and I write articles that are on the internet, and like, so God has used all those things even as I was like 20-year-old. It's like, I don't know, God, I don't know how to do, like, I think this, I'm not really sure. And he has just been really faithful and gracious. So
we're going to take a 60-second sponsor break, and we'll be right back. High Ground Advisors has a 90-year history of providing investment management and planned giving solutions to churches, faith-based organizations, and charitably minded individuals dedicated to transforming lives. High Ground is trusted by over 450 nonprofit clients, and we're one of them. High Ground has partnered with Baptist Standard for over 70 years by offering a comprehensive charitable giving and investment solutions model, which includes asset management, planned giving education and development, account support services, real estate and minerals management, and expert legal consultation. High Ground and the Baptist Standard share similar values, such as serving those who are called and dedicated to transforming lives and being a trusted caretaker of legacies. They also value good stewardship, helping those who desire to be good stewards of their financial resources to find creative giving solutions to fulfill that calling. They know what they do to protect, strengthen, and grow our mission is ultimately in service to the gospel. To learn more about how High Ground Advisors can partner with you or your organization, visit their website at highgroundadvisors.org.
I went to law school at the University of Texas. I think there is an emphasis. I mean, part of the reason why I chose University of Texas, I think my top two choices, it came down to University of Texas or the University of Southern California. And as much as I wanted to live in California, when I went to visit the school at that time, like, because of it was a private school and just the enormous cost of it, not a lot of people graduated from that law school and went into public service or public interest. And so so that was like one thing. And it was like really funny because I actually think I like enjoyed when I went to visit both schools. I actually think I enjoyed USC a little bit more than Texas. Like, I remember coming back and like talking to my friends after that, I was just like not sure about Texas. One, because it wasn't my first choice. Like, I really wanted to go to the University of Virginia, but I got waitlisted there. Okay. And so like, trying to decide where to commit, because that's like, oh, I really liked California. Like, I really did like it a lot there. And then so I didn't feel, again, like super sure. Like, my visit to the University of Texas was fine. It just was like, I think I went into it, like, to be perfectly honest, feeling like, okay, God, like, I'm just going to go to Texas because I know I want to do public interest, even though I don't feel like I really would like it there. So I'm just going to go. And like, I don't know, like, it wasn't a bad visit, but I just didn't feel sure. And I just felt like when I decided to go there, it was based on these like external factors of me wanting to work in public interest. And I think also too, me wanting to work in Texas. USC there's not a network here where their law school, there's not a ton of USC law school alums in the Texas. So I felt like it was more of like those two things. Like, it was very practical. I think it was like the cost, wanting to work in public interest, and then being like, okay, when it's time to graduate and get a job, it's just not the same network. But I didn't feel like it was like a joy, like excited to go here. And again, God was like so faithful. I mean, the first year of law school is horrible. I think no matter where you go, like, okay, I definitely. Why is that? It's just because, okay, if you are used to being the smartest person and then you're in an environment where everybody is as smart as you or smarter, and then you're graded on a curve. So it's not even like if you get 95 on a test, like in undergrad, if you got a 95 on a test, in most classes, you got a 95. In law school, if you got a 95 and everybody else got 100, you failed. And so then it's like you're in an environment where everybody is smart, everybody's as smart as you. And then in terms of grades, you really are measured against other people. So then it's like you're always like looking at like, well, how are they doing? Like, so it kind of feeds that like competitiveness, of like insecurity, like jealousy, all of those like you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. And so then it's like the first year where you're learning a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of writing, a whole new way of just viewing the world. There's a reason why lawyers are like so precise with language, because we're taught like shall or may is a huge difference, and whole lawsuits and family fortunes are won and lost on shall versus may. And so it just was really stressful, and it just was like, did I make the right decision? And feeling like, is this really what you called me to? And it just was hard. And like, again, this is why I'm like so grateful for having Christian or godly parents, because I would call my mom in tears and she would just like pray for me and be like, you can do, like, you can do it. And even in that experience, like, I have so many testimonies of how, like, when people are like, oh, how do you know God is real? So many of the things that I point to are things that happened to me while I was in law school, to the point where I actually have a friend that is like, Kathryn, when I ask you about what God's doing in your life, when we talk about how you know God is real, like, God has done things for you since law school. Like, don't always just go back to that. But I feel like for me, like, that experience, in Exodus, where when they finally cross into the promised land, and in Joshua, God's like, put these stones of remembrance. Like, in my life, law school is a stone of remembrance, because I think it was one of the first times where it's like, okay, God, you have called me I feel like you've called me to this, but I'm not sure. It is very hard. Is this what you really have called me to? And I think it was one of the first times where I think before that, a lot of my identity was built around being smart and being one of the smartest people, and being in an environment where that kind of is like stripped away. it's like, okay, who am I really? And also too, like, I think the learning of the very important lesson that your identity is not in what you do, that who you are, who God has created, like, I don't know, finding my, like, it was the first time that I really was like, no, my identity is in Christ. Like, it's not about grades or all these kind of external things, because I think if you put your hope in those things, like, they will let you down. And I graduated, and I wasn't the, like, I had a fine GPA. Like, I have friends that have graduated with much higher GPAs and like went into like corporate law settings, and I thought, even when I graduated law school, most of my friends had jobs before graduation, because the way law school works is you like intern or
intern
second
or clerk or
and then they offer you, so going into your third year, you know if you've been hired or not. So all of my friends, my girlfriends had jobs, and I was like, I don't know. I have this desire to like, I wanted to do policy work, and again, like, it's just, it's so crazy. Like, that year, the year that I was graduating was the year that not Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama like were running against each other. So I was graduating law school in the midst of the Democratic primary. UT got to host one of their primary debates, and I went with some girlfriends. We didn't have tickets. We just were like, oh, this is historic. We should go. And so we were just kind of like, we're just going to stand around outside and like see all the like heavy, famous people come in to like watch them debate. Like, we were total nerds, because this is not interesting or cool at all. But we were like so excited. And so we're standing out there, and this producer from CNN comes over to us and is like, we have a huge empty spot like right behind Hillary Clinton's head, and we need to fill it with people because it looks bad on TV. Would you guys want to go in and sit? She's like, they're not the best seats because you're kind of like to the side, so it's not like you're not in front.
You don't get to see them, the whole nation gets to see you.
So she's like, they're not the best seats, but we were like, like, so and I tell this story because at some point in law school, I think my second year, I had interned for a state senator, but we had like lost contact, and like I'm going through the process of like trying to figure out what I want to do or like work or whatever. So this is coming towards the end of my last year of law school, and I ran into her like when we were leaving. She was standing like right in the front aisle next to Chelsea Clinton, and she was like, Kathryn, this is Chelsea. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And she was like, what are you doing? Like, what are your plans? And I was like, I don't have any plans. I don't know what I'm doing. And she was like, oh, well, we're looking for policy people in the office, call and like set up or whatever. And so that's how I got like my, like that, like seemingly random sequence of events, like is how I got my first job in policy. And like, I worked for her for 2 years and did her press. So I was her press secretary. And then went into nonprofit advocacy. So worked for a small nonprofit organization that is focused on improving the lives through policy of like lower income Texans. So I did get to work on education policy. I worked on the school to prison pipeline and juvenile justice reform and a little bit of foster care. And that's really what solidified the path. I think before, I had this idea, like the experience with my friend was the idea, like I want to do this, but then it's like, oh, how do I actually do that? I had no idea. And like, again, God came through for me once again, and just like, yeah, it just is like a funny, like, I don't know why it wouldn't have occurred to me to like, I don't know. It just didn't occur to me like, oh, I could ask her to help me find a job at the Capitol, until I saw her and she was like, no, you need to call my office. We're like looking for people. And then the whole thing was, so I was actually hired. When I was hired to work for her, I was hired to do like veteran stuff, like Veterans Affairs and natural resources, which I was not interested in.
I was about to say that doesn't sound like anything like
No, I was not interested in it at all. But I was like, okay, it's a foot in the door and it's a learning experience. So I'm going to do it. Well, again, like this is in the heat of the 2008 presidential election. And so in the office, we would like sit around and like watch CNN like at lunch or whatever, and like talk about our political opinions or whatever. And after her press secretary had been on a maternity leave, and basically had her baby and decided she just wanted to stay home. Like she just couldn't have a job that was so demanding and like time consuming with having a young infant, which is like totally understandable. So my boss needed like a press secretary like pretty quickly, and the legislative session in Austin was starting. And basically she asked me to do it, and I was like, I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before in my life. I'm not even a journal. Like I have a degree in English. I'm not a journalism. Like I don't, because that like is more common. And she was like, no, you have really good instincts. When we sit around and we talk about politics, you just, the way you see things, like the way you communicate, you're acutely aware, you're really smart. I know that you could figure it out. And I have no idea why she took a chance on this like 20-year-old. I literally had no idea. And I mean, like working for her, I mean, that year she chaired the Democratic National Convention. I mean, it was a fairly prominent Texas Democratic woman, and was like, oh yeah, you 20-year-old girl from Dallas, Texas, who knows nothing about like press or like, and this is like your first political policy job. Yeah, sure, you can do it. And yeah, we all need people who will like take a chance on us, who have faith in us when we do not have faith in ourselves, who will give us the opportunity to make mistakes and like crawl before we walk. And it was an amazing experience. I like loved working for her. And I left because I really, really still wanted to do policy. I think I like love communications, and I see how God used even that experience. Yeah, but I really wanted to do, I think, more like crafting and writing and developing policy. And like with press, you're just figuring out how to like explain it to people,
right?
Not so much as like crafting. But yeah, it was great. And I like when I went to the CLC, the things I learned working for her, I used in lots and lots of different ways. And so but yeah, that's how that kind of like has strung together in my life, like looking back at hindsight.
Yeah. And when your time at CLC came to an end, how did you come to that place where you said, okay, I'm going to step away from this kind of policy work and pursue a theological degree?
Yeah, so when I went to the CLC, I felt like I knew policy and politics really well. And so I've always like, I think those are the two things I'm like most passionate in my life. Well, three things I'm most passionate about in my life. My faith, politics, my family, and then Beyonce. So
yeah, I know. I've seen. I know about Beyonce.
So
yeah.
That's four things. But
okay, I was going to say that sounded like more than three. Yeah.
But the opportunity to put two of those things together, it had never occurred to me that I could do as my dream or vocation career, both faith and public policy.
Okay, I was waiting to see what those two things were.
Yeah.
It wasn't, to see if Beyonce was in there somewhere.
Beyonce,
yeah.
And I, so working for the CLC, I was like, I'm getting to do these two things together, and it's awesome. But I felt like I didn't know as much as I thought I did about how faith should inform politics. Like I read books, and it would be, and I'm like trying to discern for myself, and I just feel like I feel like I just don't have the tools to like fully understand and develop my own philosophy of this. And I think one of my like other personality traits is like I really want to know for myself. Like other people can tell me, and I try to be very teachable, but I also want to like understand for myself, and I just felt like I didn't have that. And so I for a couple of years I worked full-time with the CLC and went to Truett part-time. And then when it came down to time to leave the CLC, I had just been praying like pretty much I think since 2016, like the beginning of that year, had felt very restless. Went to talk to my pastor. I went to talk to a spiritual director. And I didn't know like what it was. Like I just had this feeling of like general unease. And the spiritual director I worked with at the time was like, well, I think it's just like God is preparing you to like do something else. He just hasn't revealed it to you yet. And the unease is, the restlessness is that you know it's time to go, but you don't know what it is. Or like, you know, it's time to do something else, but you don't know what it is. And so that was like part of it. And then in 2019, I started working with a counselor, who really kind of helped me think through it more. And one of the things he said to me, he's like, well, think about it. What is it that you really want to do? Like, what is it? Because he's like, you know, you have a lot of gifts and talents and you could do a lot of different things. And he kind of was like, I believe it is that God has already told you, like has put in you what it is that you really want to do. And you're just, what is holding you back is fear. And so, you know, I like prayed about it and journaled about it and like talked to him endlessly about it. And it just felt like, okay, the thing that I love doing, in addition to faith and politics, is I love teaching. Like I love discipleship. I'm very passionate. It has made such a huge difference in my life. I would not be where I am without the women who've discipled me, the men and women who've discipled me. You know, even to the extent of like going back to my friend that I mentored, discipled in college, like even like I wouldn't have any of this if I had not discipled her. And so I was like, I really think I just want to be in a place where I just disciple people to think really, really well about faith and politics, and like really wanting people, because I feel like it's such a gap and there's like a lot, and I think we are seeing a lot in kind of our larger culture of what's going on, is that pastors aren't equipped, like they don't know how to talk about it, or they're afraid to talk about it. And so people have gone and sought other resources, and so they're being discipled by other things that are not necessarily biblical or scriptural. And so I really was like, I really thought, like, I really wanted to teach at a seminary or like in college, or, you know, a part of helping like the next generation think through these things. Faith and politics, ask better questions, have better resources. And so it kind of was like, you know, I can keep working full time at the CLC and going to school part time, but it's like, this is just going to drag it out longer. And I just like, let me just take a break and like focus on this seminary thing. Cause I feel like that's the thing God has called me to in this season, the thing I'm most, and it's like, it's very hard. And it's easy to get really overwhelmed with like busyness. And I just think that like, I had an experience when I turned 30, where God was like, there are a lot of good things that you can do. And like for a lot of Christians, there are a lot of good things we can do. But what is the thing God has actually called you to? And it can be, I think we have one big calling, you know, like to know Jesus and to make him known. And then we have individual callings, but it can look different in different places in our life, you know, like this is my calling, or this is my giftedness, but in this season it looks like this, or in this season it looks like Y, or whatever. And I felt like, okay, in this season, my number one calling is to do school. And I feel like I cannot do both of these things. And so I walked away from the CLC and have been full-time at Truett. And it's hard. I think it's hard when you're in your 30s and, you know, you're like, feel like you're on this career trajectory and like salary and like, you know, benefits, and then going back to being a student. But God has been really faithful, and yeah, I'm really grateful for my time at the CLC. I learned so much, and again, I don't think I would be where I am now if I had not had that experience, if I hadn't gotten to work with those people. I think it made me a better leader, in a whole host, and beyond just like knowledge. I think I'm a better leader having had that experience of like learning how to, like have conversations. It's hard. Policy it's very hard because it's always about like negotiating compromises. Like you're never going to get 100% of what you want. There are people that, and working in the Capitol that have, they're not motivated by altruism. It's like,
Really?
no. And so then it's like, it's just like putting together a puzzle, and like, how do you do that? And how do you do it and be spirit led? And how do you do it and maintain integrity? And then, I think the CLCO is like a very like collaborative, like team environment. And I think my previous experiences had been much more you work alone in silos. And so, what does it mean to like, what is a collaborative decision-making process? I don't know. There are just lots of things I like learned in those 5 years that I'm really grateful for beyond just like technical knowledge. Just like, yeah. So, but yeah, it was a great experience. I loved serving Texas Baptist in that way and all the people that I met. And I mean, that's the thing that was hard about leaving is like the people. Like the work, I'm kind of like, it was fine. I loved it, but I really loved the people, and that was what was hard about leaving.
Well, and going to a place like Truett, you're still around some of the people, but in a different capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump ahead a little bit to your podcast, Melanated Faith, because that's relatively new.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is one way, this is an outlet for you, it sounds like, but it also sounds like it fits in with some of these key moments from your past.
Yeah. So I, mentioned my 4 things that I love, my 4 things I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Your 4 things in the list of 3.
Yeah. I do that all the time. Like people, I always say 3 and then give like 5.
Yeah, that's all right.
So Melanated Faith has brought all of those things together. I think I like have always had a love of pop culture, and like seeing what is good and beautiful and true in pop culture. And like I think all knowledge is like God's knowledge. So then like, how can we take these these things that we watch for entertainment value and make it a teaching or discipleship tool? And then I think also too, like the experience of being an African American Christian woman there are some similarities across like just what it means to be a disciple of Christ, but then I think there are some particulars. And yeah, my friend Faith and I just were like, I think I went to her and said, would you be interested in doing this? And she was like, oh yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. And so I think of the podcast is like, yeah, I think of it as like a discipleship thing of like, how do we have these conversations? How do we help people? How do we point people to the good, the beautiful, and the true? How do we help people think through these things? How do we have more inclusive conversations in the church? When we talk about singleness, are we reflecting a variety of experiences? And I think our hope is to enrich the understanding of like faith, and not to be like, to separate people out or like say like this is like the definitive experience of this. But I think like especially it feels like in this moment when more and more churches are like, oh, we want to look more like the church in Acts, like we want this like diversity or whatever, but maybe one are unsure, but then 2 like understanding that like diversity without like creating space for different experiences is not like, that's not the goal, right? Like in Acts, the story of the challenge between the Hellenistic and the Hebrew widows, it was not like, okay, well, you guys just need to start acting like these widows, and that's how you'll get your share of the almsgiving. But it was like, let's put Hellenistic Jews in charge. Let's give special attention to this unique experience. And so I think that's kind of what we're trying to do with the podcast, is just helping people think through culture, pop culture, the world, I think more faithfully, in adding this like lens that sometimes is not seen.
Well, I want to make sure that people hearing this podcast know about your podcast, because you are making an incredible contribution to the discussion. And I think you're right that when we start talking about our churches being more diverse and looking more like the church in Acts, I wonder if we're reading Acts.
No, I think the more that you read, that's a good. Yeah, no, I think the more that you read, it's like, oh, we're kind of far from that. But
Well, and it's not easy.
It's not easy. Paul spent so much time, like this past semester, I spent like, chunk of like New Testament heavy. Paul spent so much time being like, this is how you live together. This is how we form this new community. Like Corinthians, that church, the American church, Corinthians is our book. Like, there's so much. And it just is like, when you look for it, you see that like Paul, I think all like Paul and James and Peter, and I think even Jesus had an understanding that like what they were calling us to and discipling us towards is very, very challenging. I think it is impossible to do apart from the Spirit. And I think, the fact that they spent in many different ways so much time talking about like what does it mean to like live together and form a new community just speaks to the fact that like this has been it's been a challenge for the church for generations, but we keep trying, and we're learning, and that it is worth it as the bride of Christ. Like, we want to reflect well on our groom.
Going back to Acts, the church would not have even come together in the way that they did if it hadn't been for the Spirit.
Yes.
And so then what that tells me is, and we see this in Acts, that the only way that they were going to stay together was going to, and to work well together, was going to be in and through and by the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times we want the first part of that, we want the Spirit to pour out on us and bring us together, without realizing that we also have to rely on the Spirit to keep us together.
Yeah. No, I think that's like such a good point. And I think it is, the thing is like, the thing about the church is it like the outside world should look in and be like, I don't understand how these people stay together. And it's like, they have nothing in common. They're different races, different socioeconomics, and different languages, and they have found a way to live together in a beautiful community that makes space for all of those. And to use Dr. King's word, a beloved community that makes space for all of those different things, and where all of those people feel loved and valued. And it should be our public testimony that this is not possible apart from the gospel and the work of the Holy Spirit. And I think that, to me, that's the miracle of the church. And I think that is our witness to the world. It's like, yeah, you're right. We should have nothing in common. We should not be in churches, and we shouldn't be able to worship together. But let me tell you about this Holy Spirit and supernatural, and let me tell you about this Jesus who came, and like, it's a great, great, great evangelism tool for the church to like look like Acts, because it's foreign to the world, and so it's a great evangelistic tool.
That's a good word. I think we should end with that. Yeah. Kathryn, I am so glad that you're on the way with Jesus, and I'm grateful for the gifts that God has given you and the way that you've been able to use them, what God's called you to do and enabled you to do, and the days ahead for you and what you're going to do as you follow Christ are going to be incredible, and I'm excited to see.
Thank you.
And I hope I get to be a part of what you do in the future.
Well, I'm always appreciative of the Standard. I think you guys are doing great work, and you're doing your part, I think, to help us look more like the church in Acts.
Just because a person follows Jesus doesn't mean that person is perfect. Following Jesus is a lifetime of growing more like Him. Likewise, while there are followers who are more mature than others, who have spent more time growing close to Jesus than other followers, there are no followers of Jesus who are better than others. If you aren't on the way with Jesus, we invite you to check out the Follow Jesus page on the Baptist Standard website at baptiststandard.com/Follow Jesus to learn more about becoming a follower of Him. If you are on the way with Jesus, We hope that this podcast has encouraged you to grow more like him. I'm Eric Black, editor of the Baptist Standard, and I'm glad you've been with us today.